Hi there. Welcome back to the Academia podcast, where we talk all things architecture. With us today is Sana Tabassum from the ToScale blog. Today, we're going to tackle all things student and all things studying architecture, and we're going to provide the ultimate toolkit for tackling your architectural studies. Hi, Sana. Welcome to the Academia podcast.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
So could we start off with a little bit of background then, please? You've obviously just recently graduated.
Yes, so I just finished my Part 2 Masters in Architecture at the University of Greenwich. I also, so a bit background about me, I'm from London. I grew up here, and I also run a platform called ToScale, which is a blog and sort of channel for architecture students and graduates to help them set healthy habits and learn more about productivity.
Spot on. What was it that got you into architecture in the first place?
Well, unlike most people, I didn't really have an interest in architecture from a young age. I think it was more of a skill that I identified. I really had an interest in art. And so it was just kind of like a really good mix of creative and also something new and challenging.
What were the first signs? So just to give you an example, for me, I was always good at art, but I couldn't draw faces. So I just,
Right.
I almost tried to reverse engineer what I could draw, if you like, when I was younger. And I started sketching buildings, all that sort of stuff, and then just started looking more into that. So just as a similar sort of analogy, what was your process for finding that out, I suppose?
Yeah, I think, like when you're applying to university, for example, my parents were kind of like wanting me to do something very, serious, something that had a good sort of career path. And I wanted that mix of creativity. So while I was studying art, I had a project that I was working on where I was sort of like drawing different buildings and things like that. So it was kind of clicking from that side. And yeah, that's how it kind of began.
So would you say it was as late as when you were applying that you really wanted
pretty
to do
much. And I didn't really have anyone else to kind of ask about or rely on. I didn't really know anyone in architecture either, so it was very new to me. Same thing, like when I started university, it was kind of like a clean slate, very new, and there was a lot to learn basically.
Well, that's very similar to our situation, isn't it, actually?
There's probably more advantages in that, to be honest, because it'd probably scare you off if you knew too much at that stage.
We'll get into that. So that's interesting, because that's the same for me and Jack, where we had no one in the family. I suppose being an architect is one of those professions up there with like being a doctor, I suppose. I'm not trying to compare us to doctors, but you know what I mean? It's quite an established career path, isn't it? And that was very much the same for us. We had kind of no pre-existing help. And you say about you're better off, but I found that in first year, it was I think that bit more scary, though. There was clearly people in our year who did have family as architects, and they seemed way more prepared.
Well, there was a clear skills gap, wasn't there, between me, you, and a few others on the course. There was people who were like a lot better, and they were clearly getting help in the initial stages, because some of the models we were seeing were like, they looked professional, didn't they? And it was really intimidating for us to see that, because ours looked a bit like Art Attack, didn't it, at the time? Yeah. The stuff we were doing.
Still does. Yeah. So now, I must admit, I am digressing a little bit.
We tend to do that as well.
Did you have those, because you were nodding there when me and Jack were just chatting, you were nodding away there. Did you have those same sort of feelings then, where you felt that people were getting help, but they had a bit more of a heads up and all that sort of stuff? Did you feel that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there were a lot of people on my course who either had family who were architects, or they, knew someone in the industry, or they had even like studied architecture. Sometimes I didn't even know, but architecture is also an A-level in some places. So I found that quite interesting. So they had sort of like contacts and skills to kind of utilize in their first year, whereas I didn't really know much about architecture. I didn't really know many architects, even like in the general sense, really. So it was quite challenging for me to also, question myself and make sure that I was kind of like really ready for that course, because I don't know if this was the same with you, but during my first year, like 50% of the year kind of dropped off by the end of the year. So it was quite a weird thing to kind of see people recognize that and drop off, go into different career paths. But I think eventually over time, I kind of got used to what I was doing and exploring new ideas. And so it was really in that first year where it kind of set in stone that this was a good path for me.
What was it that kept you hanging in there?
Part of it was the challenge because I really enjoy learning. So I was learning constantly, whether that was like hand drawing skills, model making, or just like general stuff about the industry. So I quite liked that. I think, obviously workload and pressure is a big thing that factors into why people left. But I think, from the beginning, I was quite, organized. And so that really helped me to stay on top of things.
Well, again, so many similarities. You said there towards the end, being organized. Although we chose the wrong side of the day to work, we were organized, weren't we? We were very methodical with how we went about things.
Yeah. There was an intensity to our work, wasn't there? Even though we did it at the wrong time of day.
Yeah.
And that's something we've reflected on since and probably would change.
Yeah. So again, you're a big advocate for this. We'll get into the meat of that in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I just wanted to touch on a few of those things is obviously the main theme of the podcast is about, it's trying to give as many architecture students just some guidelines, hopefully we can give a bit of a framework, a bit of advice. And there's certain things that looking back, we were terrible for. We have touched on a few bits in different podcasts, but I think this one's going to be very student focused, which is great. And some of the things there I asked you about, what kept you hanging in there and all that sort of stuff, staying organized, staying challenged. I think they're very good things to draw on. We found that other people as well, though, and I suppose you had a little bit of this because you were quite late to realise what you wanted to do. We found that a few others that dropped off. It was about 50%. We found that a few others they just didn't fully want to be an architect, basically. So they just, for me personally, I didn't have a plan B. You know what I mean? I did want to be an architect from an early age,
right.
And for me, it was about just staying organised, almost like staying patient with it. But I just knew I wanted to be an architect, whereas a few others chose it. Probably not too dissimilar to yourself, where artistic and you saw it as a respectable profession to get into. But I think there just wasn't enough of a desire to be an architect, because I think you need enough of a drive, don't you, to become one. Otherwise, I don't think you'd hack it in the end, would you?
Yeah.
You have to love it or learn or grow to love it, or it exposes you, because it's just too hard a slog to not love it, because you're sort of in it for the glory, not the money, aren't you? So
yeah. Hopefully we can touch on a little bit of that. You are somewhat of an entrepreneur yourself, and I think I don't think that gets spoken about enough. And by the way, this is going to lead me to my third intro question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're going to, just being an architect alone isn't really going to make a millionaire of you, other than the star architects. And I think we should speak about it a bit more, really. There are other ways to make money as an architect. Other ways that I think that won't get in the way as well of being an architect. And one of our motivations, it's probably one of the first times we might have even mentioned this, is our motivation for academia is to actually give us a secondary income and more financial security to our main architecture business. And then what that'll do is it'll allow us to become more selective with our projects, the clients we work with, all that sort of stuff, and just take a bit of pressure off. That was our main motivation for starting it. So my third and final intro question before we get into the meat of it is, why did you start your website and the blog and all that sort of stuff?
I think it stemmed from my struggles during my undergrad, where, again, like, I felt very isolated and I didn't really know much about the industry. I didn't really know how to kind of do drawings or things like that. And obviously they teach you stuff in first year and second year, but then you're kind of, as you go along, you're left on your own. And so while I was picking up these skills, I noticed that my friends and peers around me were also struggling. And so like the summer after I graduated, I decided why not just make a very quick blog to kind of share the things that I have learned, and hopefully that might help someone who is in the same position that I was. And it kind of grew from there. Like I started off with 3 blog posts in September in 2019, and now we've grown to 100 blog posts. So it's kind of like you're always finding new things or new topics that people can learn from. And obviously I've explored other avenues like the YouTube channel and tutorials and projects like magazines, conventions, etc. So yeah, it's just been a very interesting and amazing learning curve for me too.
Yeah, there's a synergy with our own experience there, isn't it? Because we started out of a need to improve from when we were in university, but we didn't act upon it as quickly as you. So you're sort of doing it in real time. Ours was more retrospective, looking back. We then developed a need basically round 2 when we started employing students, didn't we? So we were reliving the struggles via them, which then sort of was the genesis of academia, wasn't it?
Yeah. But I like the way am I right in saying that when you got over a certain hurdle, you were then reporting that on your website to then help others then who were that kind of step behind you?
Yeah, exactly. And again, like in a similar way, it was very retrospective of me because I hadn't documented anything while I was studying my bachelor's, but I was still keen to kind of share the things that I struggled with. And so recently, for like the past 2 years, when I was studying my master's, I made it a point to kind of document as much as I could. I was doing like weekly YouTube videos as like Aukey diaries. And that seemed to not only resonate with people, but also kind of like be a supportive person in that community. So I think that does kind of have a huge impact on people.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes you just want to know that somebody is going through the same experience as you, and because you feel very lonely at times doing architecture, and you don't always get the approval to be told if you're doing it correct. And I suppose if they're reliving the journey through you as well, it's a good cuddle. You're giving them a cuddle, aren't you?
I was always accused of that, wasn't I? They kept saying to me, "You always want a pat on the back."
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah, well, because you're giving me nothing to go on. So, and you mentioned as well there about you do get taught things. I know you're talking specifically about first year, but I think it's true for the entirety. Really, you are taught things, and I think you almost appreciate it more after the fact as well when you look back. But there are big spells, aren't there, where they're expecting a lot of you, and you are kind of left to your own devices, and you're like, I'm not entirely sure. You don't even understand how to interpret a brief yet, and all that sort of stuff. So obviously that's obviously that's what we're all trying to combat, really. And I think your content resonates with a lot of people because, again, it's just not dealt with well at university, is it? The struggles, the not feeling alone, the anxiety of it all, the pressure of it all. So that's very good introduction. So what we've done is, just for everyone's benefit, we've prepared or agreed 7 key topics between us that we're going to discuss, and then we're going to ask Sana a couple of little extra questions at the end. So the first topic is the entry into architecture and how to choose the right course, the right uni, and then how then do you set yourself healthy habits to succeed. So if I can be honest with you, right, I actually wasn't fully clear on when you mentioned the right course. I totally understand the right university. In my opinion, I think there is a right and a wrong university for certain people. I think some universities and architectural schools are more theoretical than practical, and vice versa. So I think that there is a yardstick there. But in terms of the right course, are you talking about different types of architecture course, or what? Can you just sort of start us off with that?
Yeah, so it was a mix of both, really. I think there's a distinction between choosing the right architecture school and choosing the right course for yourself, because like I said, like so many people in first year, after a couple of few weeks, they realize that it's not for them. But most of these people are actually still creative people. So they tend to go into other courses like graphic design or interior design, which are all equally, creatively satisfying. And I think choosing the right kind of course comes down to where you see yourself or what you see yourself doing for the next 3 years, because you have to see it as like a time investment. And in terms of picking the right architecture school, like you said, like there's different ways of teaching, and studios have different approaches to how they want to teach architecture. And although we're all under the same kind of guidelines from RIBA, it does vary a lot, and it does kind of show itself once graduates start applying for jobs. So I think, you can get very kind of misled by league tables like I was. And you start to think about, which architecture school is the best, and, based on rankings that aren't exactly accurate. And I think that is such a shame, because, you're not getting the right information, and, like choosing the right university is a very big life decision. So I think you have to have all the information laid out. You have to understand what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, what the requirements are, what the approach is. So I think it's very important for an 18-year-old or, someone who is applying for university to have all that information.
And for me, I think you almost beat me to the punch there by you touched on there the relevance of what you're going to learn and produce at that university to practice, the relevance of that to practice.
It's a very mature discussion to have, because not a lot of people are thinking about it in that level of detail at that time. I know I wasn't. I really limited my options.
Well, we just wanted to stay at home, didn't we? We were terrible for we just wanted to stay local. Whereas actually, if I could do it again, I would try and identify 2 universities, one for degree, one for masters. I think there's something to be said for trying 2 different options, unless you absolutely nail it with your degree, obviously. And then for me, my bit of advice would be, again, looking back, my bit of advice would be, and you've done some great content around this recently, I would actually go to degree shows of maybe pick 10 and probably a little bit of traveling in that, but say pick 10, your top 10, and go to all the degree shows. And for me, it would be identify the relevance of the output to real world practice, because I think I won't name names, but there are some universities, architecture schools, that are mega abstract. And although it's an impressive name, I as an employer would look at it and go, I can't see that. I can't see how that would translate, other than maybe raw skill. You know what I mean?
And on that, to follow that through, you'd have to be acting at AS level, wouldn't you? Because by A level, it's too late.
When do you make your choices?
Well, you'd need the degree show, and then you'd be informed, and then it'd be the following year, wouldn't it? So you'd need to act at AS level, which is something that nobody's doing. So
yeah.
Because if you went to see a degree show at A level, you've already chosen by that point, haven't you?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, what advice would you then have, Sana, for so the point you've made are right in terms of the criteria, but just a little bit of advice on, obviously you can only draw from your own experience. How could someone limit the chances of making an error, let's say, for choosing a uni?
Yeah, I think attending degree shows is a great one, but the problem, I think, is that schools aren't really exposed, or they're not really in touch with the architecture community or like the universities, and so that kind of stuff tends to be missed. I think if people do have a keen interest or passion in architecture, they should, start following people online. Like, there's so many creators now. Most of them are students. Most of them are documenting their kind of like journey, and you get to not just learn a lot from them, but you get an insight into what architecture is really like. And so I would say start following these people, start getting an understanding of if that's something you want to do. And another thing I think, is just kind of like stepping into the industry. Like, obviously it is difficult at that age where you've got exams looming and things like that, but I think keeping an eye out for kind of organizations or programs or events is also really a good way to kind of get your foot in the door and just see and test things out and know whether or not this is for you.
Yeah, no, spot on. What's funny with our personal experience as well is we weren't even getting fed this information.
Well, social media didn't exist when we were doing it.
We're not that old.
But it didn't. So there was
Did it
no
not? It
there was
must
no
have done.
Instagram when
Was there not?
No, when we
Right.
were 17.
Um,
So this is all a new tool which is now available, and
yeah.
you're sort of putting yourself at a disadvantage if you don't utilize it to its full potential.
Yeah. Okay, no, I think that's a great piece of advice then. Yeah, follow these creators and get a bit from them. Even DM them and stuff. Every creator that I've tried to reach out to has always answered back. I think, people are willing to help, aren't they? I think we all know the struggles, don't we? So I think we're all willing to help each other. And then the last part of the first little topic was, and this is one of your, I think anyway, this is one of your big messages, isn't it? About setting healthy habits. So before I get your opinion on that, I just want to revisit when I said, I was sort of looking at Jack earlier saying that we picked the wrong end of the day. So for some strange reason, we worked late, but we never done we've done the odd all-nighter, but we weren't big on it. We didn't always do it. We did set a structure, but we were always getting up late, weren't we? And then working the kind of last third of the day, really, wasn't last 2/3 of the day.
Yeah, it was like a compound effect, wasn't it? So we went to bed later, got up later, and that added like half an hour on every day for like probably a month. And then before we realised, we'd switched our working day to through the night.
Our body, honestly, we warped our body clocks, didn't we? It was so strange. But in saying that, we still did set a structure. Just a very, very simple Excel spreadsheet. And we just broke our tasks down and just try. You never fully stick to the time chunks you give yourself, but we did structure it as best we could. And we've said this a few times now on podcasts that our bit of advice would be to just try and treat it as working hours.
Yeah.
Just try, 9 to 5, roughly, and try and just keep it to that sort of core. You're leaving time then for obviously time to yourself, socialise and all sort of stuff. So it's, you still kind of keeping in touch. And then obviously that rolls over into employment then quite nicely, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So that would be our little take on it. What's your opinion? What would be your kind of headlines for?
Well, I think the problem stems from the fact that in university, you're not really taught how to manage your time. Like that's not even on the table. You're kind of like stuck right into it, start drawing, do this project, do that project. And before you know it, you're managing a bunch of things. And so I think, like you said, like having a structure is great. There is really no wrong time to be working. Like I'm a night owl myself. I love working at night, but that's just how it is. I think the problem kind of switches into sort of toxic culture is when you're sacrificing your sleep. And I think sleep is like the number one important thing, like regardless of whether we're talking about university, like even in general life. And there's science behind that too. So I think as long as you're not sacrificing your sleep or your well-being, then that's okay. But yeah, having like a really good structure is really important. And like you said, like with socializing, like it can be really easy for us, especially when you're working on a project and you want to go that extra mile and give it your all. Sometimes we tend to kind of like continue working on it or continue, obsessing over the small details. So I think in that case, it's really important to schedule in like socializing stuff, whether you're like going to a museum or hanging out with friends. And that kind of makes it a little bit easier because then your mind isn't always focused on just your architecture work. So I think that would kind of be like a good tip.
Yeah, and elaborating on that, I think you've covered it in your content. It's knowing when you're finished because you're never truly finished. So just draw a line and say I'm finished, and no one will notice that you're not finished apart from yourself.
The last 10%.
Yeah, I think that is really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that though. Scheduling the non-work related stuff as well. I think that's an amazing.
You used to struggle with that, didn't you? So you'd work, and I was sort of the opposite. I'd say, no, I need to just go out and see people. And
yeah. So I was going to actually, because that we are a little bit different with that. So for me again, just to be clear to the audience, the schedule in some of the good stuff as well, family time, socialising, and all that. Mm-hmm. For me, I think that's amazing. As I say, I've never done that in terms of. I structure my days a lot better now, and in our masters, I think we dealt with it a lot better as well. Because because you say in your degree, it's all a bit of a panic, isn't it? Because it's all so new and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's a good bit of advice. And then just turning it to you, Jack, you were always good for kind of listening to your body almost. You when you got to a certain level of tiredness or a loss of concentration, you just used to say, I'll do a better job of this tomorrow after I've slept properly. And all that sort of, whereas I must admit I was bad for, no, I'm going to try and plough through it.
And that's the case in work, isn't it? We've covered that before, that there are 9 a.m. tasks and 4:30 tasks in the day. And you can be doing a task at like 8 at night. That'll take you 5 hours, but it'll take you 10 minutes in the morning. And
it's all about energy levels. And like, there's a kind of like a concept of like 10K work by a sort of creator called He. And he basically says that there's like work that is worth 10K that is going to get you 10K, and work that is going to get you like $10, for example. And he maps out a sort of like energy chart during the day. So you kind of have to start questioning yourself very early on, like where is your energy the highest during the day? If that is like towards later on, like after 5 p.m, and that's totally fine. It's just about recognizing that and then assigning tasks to that priority.
Yeah, no, and that's it. You're massive on that, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm more of a thinker in the morning and I do it in the afternoon, where I just go on autopilot and draw, whereas in the morning I do the really complex thinking tasks, and I just can't, I personally struggle doing them later, but people may have a different way of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there is like a right or wrong way of doing things. It's just about recognizing that and then setting those habits early on, because that's just going to benefit you in the long run, even after university.
So they almost like rules that you, again, would that be your advice to new students, is try and set yourself those little rules, keep disciplined, and you know, again, you're big on this as well when you say like it'll be there tomorrow, won't it? You know, the work will be there tomorrow, and you know, again, you talk about, you know, perfectionism kind of gets in the way of completing it as well. If you just try and just set yourself that discipline, and if you are capping the time that you're working and you're scheduling in the personal stuff, it focuses the mind that, well, I need to get it finished by that point, and you know, it helps you prioritize. So yeah, no, spot on.
I think at a degree it's a real struggle knowing your own ability, and we've covered this before, in that you're not really proficient in software, so you don't know how long it takes to do a task. But by the time you get to like your masters, you know, like that task's going to take me an hour, so I'll do that then. And at degree, you're just not aware of that because you're still learning how to use the software to complete the task. That's
why it is harder at degree, really, because you still don't know your own abilities. So okay. So the next topic was networking and building a personal brand. We never did this. We were saying before, how impressed we were that you even brought that up as a as a thing to identify, because we didn't see it as an issue until it becomes an issue, which is when you're trying to get employed and other ways of earning money as an architect or a creative. So you've clearly done that. You've done that with your social media and your website. What would your advice be then for a new student starting? How would they create a personal brand?
Well, I think, again, the problem lies in the fact that we end up networking way too late. And I don't think there is a right time to network. So if you can start on day one of architecture school, why not? Because that way you can connect with like your tutors, your peers, and like people don't realize it obviously in their first year, but the people you study with are going to go ahead and maybe some of them will have their own practices. And that is just generally a good network to have. And so when they graduate, they fall into this trap of, oh, well, I don't really know anyone in the industry. I don't really have anyone to rely on or to connect to. And that means that they struggle twice as more when finding a job. It is already a difficult task. So I've seen like firsthand the difference it made, you know, after when I graduated my bachelor's, it was terribly difficult for me to find a job. It took me basically an entire year, as compared to when I finished my master's. I was getting job offers. I was getting people approaching me, asking if they could refer me to their practices, etc. And that was mainly through platforms like LinkedIn, and because I had built an online presence. So you start kind of seeing those doors open. And I think it is a very kind of underutilized skill to network and to build a personal brand. And it's actually, not that difficult in the sense that our generation has those skills already, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So would you encourage someone, maybe not day one, they still need to understand what they're in for, but as early as possible, create some sort of portfolio site or something like that, a little bit about themselves. And then maybe as they're going through that journey, they can just upload a project or two and all that sort of stuff, and then obviously translate that to social media content as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're posting stuff online, it doesn't necessarily need to be like a finished product either. Like you don't really have to show all your shiny work, because most of the conversations and interests come from people sharing like works in progress or photographs, or, architecture students normally have other interests in the design world. So whether that's like photography or whether it's like graphic design, sharing these things are always going to kind of benefit you in the long run. So I would definitely encourage students to, even if it's not posting online, at least connecting with people, seeing what other people are posting, whether it's like someone in third year or someone studying their masters. And then you just get a lot of exposure, I think is the right term for it, because having that kind of visibility into the industry is also really kind of helpful.
It's definitely advantageous. So, for example, your YouTube, you have the playlist documenting your journey, don't you? And each video is interesting. You're not just seeing the finished product. The videos that come before it are as interesting as the finished product. And then what that does is it gives the wider audience and people who wouldn't know who you are a glimpse into, this is how you design, this is how you articulate yourself, this is how you speak. So then by the time you finish uni, people already know who you are, because we did. So it definitely works, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you said there about visibility. So I bet you there are practices that are familiar with you and what you're about. So that 100% improves your chances. But something I thought you were gonna say there, because you brought it back to kind of visibility. But I also think as well, that with the way you've documented your journey, there's almost a bit of proof of concept that you do know what you're doing. To an employer, right. There is that little bit more evidence, isn't it? It's easy to just put a green wheel of I can use SketchUp because which is always a lie. But to actually see that a bit more depth, and a thing that we do see a lack of in graduates is confidence with clients and consultants, all that sort of stuff. I think you've definitely evidenced that wouldn't be an issue for you as well. So there are other skills that are important as well for architects.
I quite liked your video where you're discussing, like when you put on your CV, I can use SketchUp to like 8 green lights, and it doesn't really mean anything. So drawing to our own experience, we had a Revit role we needed to fill, didn't we? And we couldn't have anyone like lying on the CV in this instance, because they needed to hit the ground running. So this particular guy, we just said, can you come in and show us how you would operate on this particular project? And he come in and he was great and he got the job, didn't he? Yeah, so we've started doing 2-step interviews. Yeah, the first one is just to get to know the individual, and then the second one is if there is a specific skill set. Like we literally needed a BIM specialist architect, and we had a very complicated project, and we got his opinion on it live. We put him in, and we did warn him of that. We didn't hijack him or nothing. We did say this is going to be the next step. And he had opinions, didn't he, on how we'd start the project and lots of stuff. He challenged what we were presenting to him. And so
that's great.
Yeah, but then tying that back into your point of documenting your journey, having a personal brand and stuff, I think not just exposes you as an individual, I think it proves your skills as well, which is I think a better way than the traditional way.
I think also like part of like documenting week by week what I was doing in uni was kind of like a selfish thing too, because I was doing those the day before my tutorial, and so it was easier to do it because I was almost like practicing what I was going to say to my tutors the next day, and that way I was also seeing my weekly progress, and if I felt like one week I was lacking, I'd try and make up for it in the next week and kind of make sure that what I was presenting was newer and it was like a different iteration or whatever. And by doing that, I think over time, I also gained that like level of confidence to kind of speak about my work in a better way. because I think, again, that's like a skill that they don't really teach you in university. And it is a very important one because, I went into uni not even knowing what crits were, and like I didn't even know you had to present your work. And crits are kind of like a very popular subject where some people either hate them or love them. And I think I've grown to love them, but I know firsthand like the struggles of like presenting your work and getting up and talking about it. So I think doing all of those things helped me as well in retrospect, and it wasn't just about kind of like documenting it online. So I think you end up learning a lot of new skills that are more transferable and applicable to any situation.
Well, that's true to like the more YouTube videos you make, the better you get at it, isn't it? I've only been doing them, I don't know, the last 18 months, something like that. And when you look back at the first couple, you go, oh, I could hardly talk to the camera. Whereas the more you do it, the more confident you get. And that 100% translates, doesn't it, to real world. We, every now and then when we've got like a major planning application, we have to present in town halls, to decent sized audiences, sometimes an objecting audience. So your ability to get up and present in front of that sort of crowd is massive. And these steps that you're suggesting that people take will get them there a lot quicker. And I think I would even go as far to say that you may even reach a level of presentation that maybe, architects gone by probably never got to as well, because they've never, got that familiarity with talking in front of a camera and all that sort of stuff.
In the real world, I'd probably say the first pre-application discussion is probably the most similar scenario to a crit, isn't it? So you prepare all your work and then you present it, and then they come back and challenge everything you're presenting to them. And
the better the pre-app call goes, the better the whole thing goes, doesn't it, for full application and all that sort of stuff. Plenty of good information there. And then tying that into, you've touched on the power of LinkedIn as the next point. We're guilty of probably not using it enough. But when we do, so this is from a business perspective, we literally see an uptake in conversions, I suppose, in terms of either winning commissions or inquiries for commissions. There's something to be said for LinkedIn in terms of being active on it. I think people perceive activity as a sign of success, and then people are obviously drawn to success. So the more we post about our projects and little wins, little milestones, planning wins or topping out and all that sort of stuff, we do see an increase in inquiries, don't we?
And on the flip side, if students are posting on LinkedIn like 2 years before they finish, as they do on my LinkedIn, I'm already aware of them, as a director, like 2 years in advance. So
there's a guy I would recommend if no one's heard of him, and they probably haven't. He's not famous, but there's a guy on LinkedIn I don't even know. I think he might be either a member of academia or maybe he's inquired in the past that's got my attention. And he's a chap called Daniel Tilsley, and his LinkedIn is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So a little shout out for him. He's just finished his placement in ACOM. Like I don't even know him, and I know all that. You know what I mean? So he's about personal brand. He is a really good example. And even his LinkedIn posts, he's created like somewhat of a signature, at the bottom of his posts. Yeah. So he writes his own post, and then he must obviously copy and paste this signature in. And it kind of says, if you want to work with me or you want to learn more, and he points you to all his.
Get him to manage my LinkedIn because I'm awful on it.
Yeah, well, we might have to. So obviously we were mainly talking on a business side there. So what would your advice be for students using LinkedIn? Again, we never did. What would your advice be, and how soon and all that sort of stuff?
I think probably a good time to start kind of being active on LinkedIn and posting would be right after you graduate, or even a few months if you can. I think typically what you would do is kind of say, I finished my bachelor's or master's degree, I'm looking for work, etc. And you just stop there. But I think you can kind of give yourself a better position and advantage by, listing out your skills, for example. The little like LinkedIn open to work thing. People kind of turn that on and just leave it and expect to hear from people. But I think you have to actively engage with whether it's like practice directors or hiring managers or architects, or even someone in like the job role that you are looking for, whether it's like a Part 2 architectural assistant, for example, and just start talking to them. If they're creating content, then you can start replying or adding comments. And again, like you said, it just kind of puts you in their eye. So, you know, if they do have any opportunities in the future, they kind of like already know, or maybe can list out a few people and you'd be on that list. And so in terms of like, you know, students struggle with not knowing what to post on LinkedIn, I would just say start engaging as much as you can. Also reacting to like industry news or kind of topics is a good one. And just kind of, documenting your process and showing your work that isn't kind of like in a little PDF tucked away nicely. It's kind of actual drawings or photographs or models or whatever it is, and your thought process behind them. And just be very kind of like succinct and clear with it too.
Yeah. And again, it points back to increased visibility, increased, improving the personal brand that you've got and all that sort of stuff. And again, as you say, I think the example I used, I've got a sense of familiarity with that individual. So, to be completely honest, if we did have a position that was relevant to him, I probably would message him, and that's purely down to his own use of LinkedIn. And the reason, am I right in saying that the reason you've touched on LinkedIn and it's the reason why we, as from a business perspective, we try to use LinkedIn the most, is that's where the professionals are, isn't it? Really, that's where the conversions are. We don't really see much, although Magnus would disagree from Strom, but personally, we haven't seen much of a conversion rate, if you like, for commissions through Instagram. It's always when we get more active on LinkedIn, we see that. So is that your main point? Is that's where the right people are?
For sure. I think LinkedIn also gets a bad rep in the sense that students think it's a very boring platform, or there's nothing to do there, or people are only really celebrating like their new jobs and stuff. But actually, there's a whole kind of creator network on LinkedIn. And I think it's good to have your portfolio or your pieces of work on Instagram. But like you said, like the professionals aren't really seeing it. So getting onto LinkedIn as quick as you can is a really good option for students and graduates.
Totally agree, and you are right as well. I think it's massively underrated. I think we might have even headed off the next point.
Yeah, we sort of covered it.
Positioning yourself online. I think we have touched on that. Okay, well, here's a good one then. So the gripes with the industry. We could talk, but this could be its own podcast, to be honest. But
don't kick Adam off.
No, well, I'm in a good mood this week. We've won a few new projects, so I'm in a good mood. Come on. So you start us off, and we've obviously, myself and Jack have discussed a few things ahead of this, of course. So we've got a few opinions as well. And to just introduce it a little bit as well, something that you've been saying quite a lot online, or stuff I've seen of yourself recently, is you're not shy to call out some of these things, but equally you're not one of those that just pans the industry either. And because it baffles me that when people are overly panning the industry, and it's like, well, go on then, move out of the industry if it's that bad. So I think you strike a good balance. So I just want to kind of just get that out there, that I think, ideally, once we go through some of these issues that you've got, hopefully we can arrive at some good suggestions as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think for a long time now, in the architecture industry, problems like toxic working or overworking or getting underpaid and not being paid enough, these are all issues that have been a thing for a long time now. And I think it's kind of like a shifting point in the last couple of years, especially because, it's all good and well to kind of like talk about these problems and, being aware of them. But if you're not kind of adding to them or providing a solution or providing different options, I just don't really see the point in, talking bad about the industry, because there are a lot of good things too. And not every industry is perfect, especially the architecture one. So yeah, my kind of gripe in that sense is basically with, people or especially creators who have built like this audience behind themselves, and they're known for, I guess, creating content for students. And they're not kind of seemingly realizing the impact that's going to have on said students when they turn around and kind of say, the architecture industry is really bad. Like, you don't get paid enough, or you have to spend hours and hours working, or you study for so long and you're still not qualified, etc. And I sympathize with all those points. I feel like there's a better way to kind of tackle it. And so that's why part of one of my content pillars, I could say, is, creating content for architecture students to set those healthy habits early on so that when they go into practice or when they start working, they're not kind of overwhelmed, they're not, underprepared, and they kind of know and already have a system for managing their workload, for example. And obviously that's kind of like a very small thing in the wider scale of things, because, systematic change will take a long time and it's only just beginning, I think. So instead of waiting for that, I think it's much better to start tackling it on a personal level.
I'll tell you what as well, I think you've made me think of something there about, you're saying there...
Sorry, does that remind you of a tutor we had who will not be named?
What bit?
The bit who used to talk down the industry.
I'm not fully with you, but tell me later. But when you said there about setting habits, setting the right almost boundaries as well, personal, professional boundaries, if we can reach out to a good number of students, young practitioners, if they're setting boundaries in their own working lives, I'd like to think that would start to set boundaries industry wide. We may as well shoot for the stars. And actually, what hopefully will start to happen, because we're doing a much better job of this now, aren't we, than we did 5 or 6 years ago when we started the practice. We set boundaries with our clients in a very, very similar way. So we used to take calls all hours and weekends, and we have now turned. We got a little bit of business mentorship a couple of years ago, and the terminology was almost like you've friend zoned all your clients, and you need to turn them into a transactional relationship. And once you go from a friendly one to a transactional one, it doesn't have to be doesn't have to go any less friendly. But what it does is it turns it into just a bit more of a business transaction, and everyone benefits from it as well, because the architect isn't burnt out, so the client is getting better results. And I think if we can tell as many people as possible to kind of implement that process as early as possible into the career, which is obviously what you're doing, hopefully that'll affect the bigger practices, because sadly there are bigger practices that do have that negative culture. But to be fair to some of them, that might be because the clients that they're working with have been spoiled by a certain way of working that they're used to. They're just used to the architect being so passionate about the job that they're in 24/7. So then I think you know what I mean. And we used to spoil our clients a little bit. That we used to answer them and we used to turn things around far too quickly. And now we've just slowed everything down, managed expectations, and everyone's better off for it, aren't they?
Yeah, it's definitely better to monetize the whole process. And I know it's not all about the money, but for example, these part 1s and 2s who were on like the year out and they're working till like midnight in a basement building models, it's not good for anyone, that. And we have rooted that out, haven't we, to echo what you've said.
To be fair, we never did that, or did we either? As in, like, we've always paid overtime, for example. That's always that's a thing that, so there's no avoiding deadlines, by the way. So sometimes you do just have to work late, sometimes you do run out of time almost.
Yeah.
But we've always paid overtime or paid time in lieu, which isn't a bad return as well. We give the option. We just say, what would you rather have? Would you rather have say the deadline's like for a Friday evening or something? We say you have the Monday off. That's happy days, or it's paid.
Sorry, I was talking more personally. We used to do it ourselves.
Oh, sorry, at university?
No, in practice. So we'd work till like midnight. And you don't really get any additional thanks for it.
No. So sorry, yeah. So that's actually not a bad little link to what I was saying then, in terms of. Some of the big project pitches that we've gone for, or as you say, or we've gone for a deadline on a Friday, and now we're getting better at just saying you'll get it Monday rather than pushing yourself for Friday. And as I say, going back to your point, just keeping it relevant more to students, is that if you get set yourself those rules early on, it will have an industry wide impact. And is that roughly what you were trying to get to as well? Or not trying, you did get there in terms of you saying you're talking about systemic change, and you almost sort of said these are little changes, but I think they're the changes that will have the bigger impacts.
Yeah, definitely. I think also like these the sort of like stereotypical, I guess, tropes of being an architect or working in the architecture industry, they're kind of stuck in this like generational loop where, you know, your tutor might have experienced working too late or like, you know, overworking, etc. And therefore they're passing it on to their students who are then graduating, working in practice and doing the exact same thing. And so that kind of culture has just been like the norm for a very long time. But I think like the little changes have been making a difference. And I think there are a lot more healthier practices who have managed to kind of set those boundaries and just make like a very healthy working environment. So yeah, like I do feel like tackling it on a very small level will lead to a bigger change.
Absolutely. I think COVID's had an impact as well.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, has had a bit of a reset. It's changed the way we work. We always had a bit of remote working anyway. I think younger architects are always very technology led anyway, so we always had that kind of facility. But now, yeah, we're even more flexible than ever. And you know those traditional traits of almost demanding that people work late and demanding this certain ethic and all that. We've never demanded it, but we have gone through a process of we were almost too nice, too receptive to client demands, and it didn't yield any better results. If anything, it was the other way. I feel like now we're carving more time out for quality control and more discussions about what we're working on and discussions about, you know, what, should I do this, should I do that? And
you just end up burnt out and tired, and that doesn't benefit you or the client.
That's exactly it. Burnout helps no one, does it? And you mentioned it about typical traits and stuff. That was the next topic.
Mm-hmm.
Avoiding stereotypical traits of architecture students and professionals. Is that mainly your point there about just that constant strive of just not eating, sleeping, and just burning yourself to bits?
Yeah, I think so. I think even like content online kind of almost suggests in a way that, you know, if you want to be an architecture student, then you have to be ready to accept that you're not going to sleep well and you're going to have to work like long hours and late into the night. But I think we can kind of stop all of that and like kind of change that mindset completely, because if we're already kind of giving students and future generations like that expectation, then that's not going to be healthy in the long run. So I think it's down to, I guess, like the people who are creating content online, but also setting the tone, whether it's in practice or in university, to kind of generate that kind of healthy behavior, I suppose.
Yeah,
I tend to agree.
It's a very good point. That if you're setting that expectation, you're gonna almost predict that behavior, aren't you? That's you're almost instilling that behavior. Whereas it baffles me a bit, because honestly, I've never seen it as bad as some people describe it. And me and Jack have worked at global companies, Nightingales and BDP for me, and neither of those practices were toxic to work in. Some of the senior architects were amazing in teaching you time management and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the bigger practices again, or the more famous practices. Maybe they've got that little bit of entitlement. They think, well, they can treat the staff how they want. But in terms of that, managing that expectation in the industry, well, I can't speak for you, Sana, but me, Jack, and Kenny, who can't be with us today, actually, because he's just had a little girl.
Yeah, he's not dead.
Yeah, he's no longer with us. No, we're living proof that you don't need that toxic work culture to get on in architecture, and if anything, I think we're better off for doing the opposite as well. So we've been there as a practice. We never encouraged it with our staff. If anything, we took it on the chin more, didn't we, as business owners? We didn't expect it, the staff, and we said, we're still going to have to pick up this slack. So we got into a terrible habit of working late weekends, all that sort of stuff. And no one was any better off. If anything, mistakes start creeping in and all that.
What we sort of say now is we head it off a week in advance. So rather than like touching on a project like a day before it's due and it's too late to do anything about it, we'll be fully aware of what everyone's doing a week or two in advance. And we encourage them to put the hands up if they need help. And then basically we'll all jump on the project then and prioritize it that way, and we tend to nip it in the bud and avoid it.
Or again, this, you can't do it at university. You can't manage your tutor's expectations. You can't push the deadline back at university. But as you said, you can still set yourself frameworks and that. But what the key difference where we've improved our own well-being in practice, and this can 100% relate to students transitioning into practice, is that basically, and you've said this for a while, haven't you, that a deadline is a bit of an illusion, really. Other than if you're designing a school into school opening day, that's a hard deadline. But 90% of deadlines can be moved around a little bit, and it's on us as designers to set that expectation early doors as well. And that's another discipline, I think, that is an extension of what you've explained at university, is that if you set yourself those guidelines and you go into practice with that similar sort of philosophy, it'll translate into practice. And it's, for me, it all boils down to giving yourself just enough breathing space and then some. And it then allows you to work those ordinary hours and make sure that you do stretch your legs at lunchtime and all that sort of stuff.
It's nearly impossible to adhere to some of the deadlines, isn't it? Because you're in the hands of other consultants and external factors, and it just doesn't work like that in reality.
Yeah. And then the last of the kind of core topics is alternative pathways. Now, I not long ago did a talk at my local university in Liverpool, John Moores, and the topic was, what does practicing in architecture look like post-COVID? And I mentioned a few advantages of that. Like, I actually think video calls are an advantage now, because it actually reduces the number of meetings and it speeds things up and all that sort of stuff. But in there, I did say that I think people are a little bit more aware of how they can make money in other ways as well, in terms of the ability to work remotely. There are a lot of other advantages to that. And as I touched on earlier, that I think architects get paid more, I think, than maybe, again, I think that gets a bit of a bad reputation. I think you can make a really good living wage, and then hopefully, a lot of people might become either associate level, director within an established practice, or start their own practice. There are many ways to still get a really good salary within the industry. But I also think there's nothing stopping people earning a bit on the side as well, as long as they're declaring it. And with all these new technological advances, I say working remotely and all that sort of stuff, I think there are other ways of doing it, and I would encourage that as well, because, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it takes pressure off that ultimate, if you're money driven, I do think you'll end up a little bit dissatisfied in architecture. I don't think it's all about that, but I think other ways of earning money through, for example, with us, a very simple one, is that we itemize additional services outside of our core service as architects, and on occasion we will design the website for the project, we will design the brochure for the project, and we will do the CGI work. And if the architectural fee is 100,000, those additional services could be another 20, 30 grand on top of that. Yeah. So that's a little way of keeping it in-house, if you like, in practice. But I just wanted to kind of lead in with a little bit of that. What other suggestions would you have, or did you have another way you wanted to take this last topic?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think to kind of like diversify your income is a great thing, and people should start thinking about that more. Because I think, having a passive income is a really great benefit all around, right? Because you're not only learning skills, but you're being paid to do it. And I think, in terms of like alternative career paths, I see architecture as a stepping stone. And most of the time after people graduate from architecture, they kind of reevaluate whether they do want to kind of go on that 7-year journey and actually get qualified or not. And that's perfectly fine. Like, there's no shame in like not wanting to be an architect, even though you've like studied for so long, because I think it gives you so many transferable skills. And in a similar way, like for my personal situation, setting up this blog or platform, I've learned so many different skills, whether that's like soft skills or hard skills in terms of social media and marketing and copywriting. And it's actually proved to be a sustainable income for myself doing freelance work now, while I'm kind of, searching for my next role, for example. So I do think there is a huge benefit in it. And, it also allows you to offer more. So when you are applying to practices, it means that you have got extra skills that might be valuable to the employer. And that was the case for me when I got my part one opportunity, is that I was able to say, I can also, on the side, help you with any brand designing, website designing, and they were coincidentally going through a website redesign. So I had an input in that. So it wasn't just that, I was stuck doing detailing work or drawings. I was also allowed to kind of explore the business side of architecture, which I think is another good kind of way of getting exposed to what it means to practice as an architect, because you're not only creating stuff, you're also managing a business overall. So yeah, I think having kind of like just having like an idea that, you are able to do other things and it's not kind of like taboo or anything is a good kind of mindset to have.
No, absolutely. You're not obliged, though. And I think I must admit, I bet you there are people that have just then continued down that path because they felt they had to. And I've always said that I think an architect has got to have one of the most varied skill sets, haven't they? In terms of, I fancy myself as design. Say we're not trying to take the job of a graphic designer, but what we're saying is on a project that we're the designer of, what's stopping us creating the kind of extension of the project, which is the brand and all that sort of stuff. And I think, as you say, the skill that you learn as an architect through architecture school, it does translate really well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and forgive me for maybe a slightly direct one, but do you earn money copywriting? Yes, is that right? You earn, yeah.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, so that again, that's because, and the reason I picked that one out specifically is writing isn't the most natural skill, is it? Not for us anyway. No. Thank God for ChatGPT nowadays. But as I say, that's a very interesting one that you can. It isn't just about the visual, I suppose, what I'm getting at. There are other things that you can learn as well. So absolutely fantastic.
You develop skills by accident that you couldn't even envisage. So, for example, I'm the Google Ads guy in our office. Yeah,
for academia. So if you see a sponsor, Google it. That's it. It's amazing. What is next for you then? So, and that's quite tidy for the career pathway thing. From what I've seen of your content, you're not going. It doesn't look like you're going into like a part two role or anything like that. It looks like you're doing a bit of freelance stuff. So go on. So what's next for you?
Yeah, so I have been trying my hand at freelancing in a completely different industry in the sort of social media creator economy space. I am sort of casually applying for part two roles because I definitely want to stay in the industry. But like on the flip side, I do also want to kind of like bet on myself and see where ToScale can grow. And that includes doing things like courses and, expanding that whole kind of avenue, I suppose, and seeing whether or not it can become that passive income. So that's kind of like a short-term sort of next steps for me.
But still potentially, as you say, keep your hand in. Staying in the industry, but hopefully one day, as you say, you'll have your options, won't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and then sorry to do it to you, but the cliche one: if you could pick a favorite architect and a favorite building, this is just something we're going to try and ask everyone, and hopefully we can sort of turn it into something in a year's time. So go on. Who would be your favorite architect or your favorite practice?
I'd like to mix both of your questions because I generally don't really have like a favorite architect or practice in that sense. I think a building that has had a very huge impact on me is Woolmer Yard by Peter Salter. And it's a really lovely sort of space. And he's designed it very kind of in a nuanced way where he's really thought about the small details. And I quite like that because I think architecture essentially is all about the small details when it comes down to it, because you can kind of create an idea and use templates and stuff, but to actually think about what the end user experience is going to be is a really important thing. And yeah, that's kind of like the only building that really comes to mind, to be honest.
No, that's amazing. And for me, I think that's the difference between a building and a piece of architecture is the experience. Remember when we went round the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and it was just mind blowing.
That's brilliant too.
Absolutely mind blowing. And it was just, as you say, it's just such a different feeling.
It evokes emotion, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In the space. So that's a whole other
podcast anyway. We digress a little bit. Well, that's it. I think we're done. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
So that's it for this podcast. Thanks for listening. And to learn more about academia and ToScale, check out the links below.